A big fat treasure trove of information about the upcoming Dungeons and Dragons Commander decks has just been released. Not only do we get to find out about the leaders of all four of the Commander decks, but we have interesting information about things like Beholder Skeletons and lands that can get rid of Planeswalkers.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The Magic Historian. My bones hurt.
Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. My friends, I hope the day finds you well. We are here to start out a brand new week, and we have a bunch of interesting information about the upcoming Dungeons and Dragons Commander deck. So it's going to break down into two categories. We have a list of hints that we're going to go through, and then we have a little bit more of in-depth information and artwork for the four leaders of the different four Commander decks. So let us start out by diving into the hint list, because there's some delicious stuff here. All right, we've got 12 hints about what's going to show up on new cards in the Commander deck. So none of these are going to be cards that already exist, even though some of them will make you think of cards that already exist. For example, the first thing on the list is a white card that can phase out your creatures. And you might immediately go, oh, wait a minute, Teferi's Protection is something that phases out all my stuff. So it could fall into that category. But we're dealing with purely new cards. So, I mean, ultimately, phasing, it's interesting that they brought phasing back to Magic the Gathering, because phasing is a bit of a weird ability. It has some overlap with exiling to a degree, right? Basically, the idea is that the card just is phased out of existence, which feels really similar to going exile a card and then bring it back into play with like a flicker style effect. But the difference is that phasing doesn't treat the creature as a new object. So if you exile a card and bring it back to play, the game looks at it as if it's a brand new thing. It's like, yo, I've never even seen you before. Who are you, right? Whereas with phasing, when a creature phases out, it's like, boom, where'd it go? Where'd Billy go? Oh, I miss him. And then Billy shows back up, but it's like, Billy, I know you. The game doesn't go, wait, who are you, bro? So there is a difference between phasing and exiling. And admittedly, like I said, I'm surprised that Wizards of the Coast brought it back, because it is a sort of wonky rules ability that has overlap with something else and isn't exactly intuitive, but overall is incredibly flavorful. The idea of phasing something out into a realm where nobody can actually get at it is a cool concept. It's a time magic kind of vibe. So that's the first item on the list. The next item is a legend with the rules text whenever an illusion you control dies. So this is probably some sort of illusion lord creature, right? And depending on how the illusions work, it could either punish you when you lose an illusion, or maybe on the other hand, it gives you some kind of reward, right? That one isn't quite clear. After that, we've got a cursed version of a previous D&D inspired magic card. Now, there are like 25,000 different magic cards, and there's a lot of cards that you could go D&D inspired, right? Like, there's a lot of things that feel D&D adjacent. They may not have the exact name of a Dungeons & Dragons card, like Portable Hole or whatever, but it definitely has that feel of D&D, and I like the idea of something that already exists in Magic coming back as like a mirrored but cursed version of it. So that one's interesting to me, but I don't have a particular guess about what it would be. So if you do, let me know about that in the comments, my friends. After that, we've got a new card with the melee mechanic. Ultimately, to me, I'd probably say that this is the least exciting item on the list to me. I just ultimately read it and went, okay, I understand the information that's being presented, but ultimately am indifferent, I guess. After that, we've got a card named Ride the Avalanche. I picture a barbarian warrior, something like that, on basically like they have a metal shield. They've thrown the metal shield down onto the snow, and they're riding down atop an avalanche with like two weapons, dual wielding, held high. Ah! Like, that feels really awesome. I have no idea what the card will actually be. I imagine it's probably a red boost style spell, right? Ride the Avalanche makes me think of snowy mountaintops, And, then you've got the fact that it's like you're riding it downwards. It's probably going to give you some momentum. So I'm guessing it's a plus to your strength +0 style spell. That's my guess. After that, we've got something that's really interesting to me. A card that uses component counters. That's interesting. You've got spell components, right? And so the idea could be some kind of wizard that once they have the necessary components can cast more powerful spells. So depending on how that is put into effect, I'm definitely curious about the execution. Then we've got a land that can remove an artifact, creature, or planeswalker from the battlefield. For how long? Who knows? This could be something that phases, it could be something that exiles and returns it, or it could be something that returns it to a player's hand. Like, all we know is that it will make either an artifact, creature, or planeswalker leave the battlefield. And depending on how it does it and the cost involved, this could be pretty potent, right? Because lands are kind of crazy in the fact that they're the one type of permanent magic you can put out that your opponent can't really respond to. They can respond to triggers and things like that, but when you just put out a land originally, unless they literally have a land destruction spell, there's not much that can be done about it. And land destruction spells in Magic are both few and far between, and they tend to be very expensive to cast. So lands feel like the most difficult to answer style of permanence to me when it comes to Magic the Gathering, and one that has the ability to be versatile enough to handle artifact, creatures, or planeswalkers is fairly exciting. After that, we've got a new enchant player curse. I really like the idea of curses that go on us as players, because that makes perfect sense. The idea of cursing another planeswalker is something that evil planeswalkers would do. It's like, you know what? Forget messing with your creatures. Forget cursing them. I'm literally going to put a hex on you, bro. That works for me. Then this next item is super exciting. This is the most exciting item on the list, hands down. A card with the creature type Beholder Skeleton. That is an amazing idea. I very much want to see the artwork for this card and also the overall flavor concept for how they're delivering a Beholder Skeleton, because that's really, really neat. Then we've got an equipment with Equip 10. You presume that with Equip 10, it's going to have some really incredibly powerful ability or additional sideways of equipping, where Equip 10 or sacrifice a creature. It's like blood robes. Equipped creature gets +8/+8 and death touch. And it's just like, pay 10 to equip it, or sack a creature to equip it. Although, admittedly, what I just said there is way, way too powerful for just sacrificing a creature. Unless it has a really difficult to cast, costing cast as well, right? Because sacking a creature is pretty cheap to do, and giving a bonus that big in death touch would be too much. But whatever. Why not use a grandiose example? Then we've got a card with an ability that begins, until end of turn, permanents your opponent's control gain. And that is very weird. It could be anything. It could be permanent your opponent's control, gain tap. This creature deals damage equal to its power to any target. It could be permanent your opponent's control, gain death touch. I assume it's going to be some negative downside. It gives your opponent a boost, and that's part of the ability because the ability is so solid that it's like, okay, here's how we balance it off. It's a powerful ability, but it grants this to your opponent to kind of keep it somewhat equal. After that, the last item on the list is a card that grants some of your spells Cascade. So ultimately, we already have cards that give Cascade. That is a pretty underwhelming hint overall. There's going to be some Cascade action. Okay, so let's move on to the other stuff we have to talk about. That is the 4 heroes of the 4 commander decks. Here's the vibe that they're going with. There are going to be 4 commander decks. Each of those 4 commander decks for Dungeons & Dragons will have both a monster and a hero that you can use as your legendary commander. So it says that there will be at least 2 commanders in each deck. So some of these decks may actually have more than 2 legendaries that you can use to lead the deck. But each deck will have at least 2, and the theme is heroes and monsters. And the heroes themselves, not only does each deck have a hero, but all 4 of those heroes comprise one adventuring party, which I think is really neat. I like the idea of heroes versus monsters. You have one monster for each deck, and you have one hero, and they all combine a party. That's cool. So, this is Gallia on the screen. She is a paladin. She is the head card for the blue, green, white Aura of Courage deck, all right? Now, interestingly enough, Paladins have changed since the days I played Magic. Paladins were a very rigid concept back in the day, but apparently now in D&D, Paladins have a different concept where they swear like oaths to different things. So Gallia has this Oath of the Ancients where her goal is to spread joy and love, right? Joy and love. Basically, she's into music, comedy, the arts, beautiful things that are wondrous and inspire awe in the hearts of beings as a way of just lightening the load for everyone. So that's an interesting idea, because ultimately somebody who's wandering around trying to spread this vibe of like, okay, if we make the world better for people on an individual level, we bring joy and happiness to them, then that will spread across the world. You know, I feel like a god who's down for that kind of an oath is probably a pretty chill god. And it's interesting to note as well that Gallia is depicted here as a drow elf, right? Like the drow are the dark-skinned elves that live in the underworld. So, at least in the older world of Magic, in the older world of Dungeons and Dragons, the Drow were essentially an inherently evil culture. There were exceptions that rebelled against this evil setup, but mostly everybody is into worshiping the evil Spider Queen and just being heinous individuals. So the idea of a Drow that rejects that's a cool concept. We've seen that before with Drizzt. And Gallia would be another example. I absolutely love the helmet. The metal helmet with the like horns of some crazy stag or elk or something. Take that, Oko! Some kind of beast like that. It's got a good vibe. I like it. Overall, this is a nice piece of artwork and a cool concept for a character. Let us move on to the next character we have to talk about. Now, this one right here is Prosper Tomebound, okay? So Prosper Tomebound is basically a warlock. Now, warlocks make pacts with beings of insane power in most cases, right? They have a patron who essentially gives them their powers, but they're subservient to that patron. Now, Prosper is in some ways a bit different from that. That Prosper essentially was able to gamble for and win their powers in a bet from a supernatural being. Nobody knows who that supernatural being is or what the bet that they made was. But ultimately, it's how this individual was able, this is how Prosper was able to get his powers. And that tome that he's got there with the chains flying all around it, which looks amazing in all honesty. Look, you can see the chains are wrapped around him. He's got the chain on his little gauntlet style setup here, and it's all connected so that he can't lose this book, because this book contains his deepest, darkest secrets on top of all of his magic. And the book has been basically layered with many curses to destroy and confound anybody who would try and access this tome. So ultimately, he looks pretty impressive here. The floating book with the chains around it has a really nice vibe. He's got this crazy look where you can't really see the pupils of his eyes or anything. They've got this kind of golden glow that's being reflected off the glyphs that are hovering above his book as he's clearly just having the pages flip by. I love it. I love the idea of like floating tomes where you can just with mental commands cause the pages to flip looking for a spell that you're looking for. So Prosper is the red-black deck, and that is the planar portal deck. So he'll be the one heading up that deck in particular. And it's interesting to note that there's a massive difference between this character and Gallia. This party is made up of some fairly distinct and differentiated beings. This one right here, this is Vrondis Rage of Ancients. So he's a Berserker Barbarian. He heads up the red-green Draconic Rage deck. The idea behind him is that he essentially is connected to the ancient spirits of like his ancestors, the Dragonborn, and they both impart knowledge to him and also defend and aid him in battle. So pretty straightforward concept there. The idea of a berserker dragonkin sort of maniac who can also call on the ancestor spirits, which you can see behind him actually, right? It's got the same vibe. He's got this big hulking body with a massive axe, and behind him you can see the spirit of an even bigger being who has a very similar vibe to what he's doing, right? Like, the axe looks pretty similar, but not identical. The banded leather going across the torso, that definitely looks the same. You can see a buckle on each of them as well. So it's conveyed in the artwork, and the spirit is shown in this blue-grayish kind of vibe to show that it is not alive. So overall, that works pretty well. Now that leaves one character left to talk about, and this is Sephris of the Hidden Ways. So Sephris heads up the blue, black, white Dungeons of Death deck, okay? And Sephris is into forbidden lore. Sephris is a necromancer who basically was trained by the Red Wizards of Thay. That's not a good thing. The Red Wizards of Thay are an awful organization. Well, I guess they're not, they don't exist anymore. They've converted into something else. But anyways, the Red Wizards of Thay were basically like a massive organization of mages. And there was one head mage for each of the 8 schools of magic, all right? And basically the idea was these wizards would all play off against these other houses. So if you were part of the House of Illusion, then you would be against the other houses, the different schools of magic. And it would be all this like interplay where they're trying to destroy each other and the lives of the common folk don't matter. And so these ruling wizards basically made life miserable for everybody. Essentially, truly an evil and awful organization. And that is where Sephris was trained. But Sephris is interesting in that Sephris is a necromancer. However, they contend that not all necromancy is evil, all right? So they specialize in both healing and damaging magic. But the idea that all necromancy isn't evil is an interesting concept, because most people are going to automatically go, all necromancy is evil. If you're like raising the dead to serve your purposes, then it's evil. But there could be scenarios where theoretically, if somebody's spirit's not at rest and you can reanimate their body, and then their body can go and get revenge for some wrong that's done to them, is that actually evil necromancy? Do you know what I mean? There's room for discussion based on the different beliefs of your characters and the gods they serve and everything, but ultimately, it is an interesting discussion to have. Sephris's art is pretty straightforward. I mean, you can see this is clearly a wizard. I like how simple the staff is. It's just one long staff made out of some sort of metal, maybe silver, with this gemstone, this rough-hewn gem that floats above it. It's simple, but it still has a level of presence to it. And I really like the fact that Sephris's robes here show a bunch of stars on them, and the character is shown set against the night sky with all the stars in the back. You've got a shooting star falling down, kind of arcing towards the staff, and this raven that's with its just massive wingspan, and this kind of menace just flying right up behind Sephris's like shoulder. I really dig the vibe of this artwork overall. So, my friends, those are all the tasty tidbits we have about the Dungeons & Dragons Commander decks. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, you can give it a like to let YouTube know. The algorithm loves that stuff. Big thank you to all of my patrons. Thank you very much for supporting my channel, and I will see all of you, my friends, in the next video.